The verse Philippians 4 verse 13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," is one of the most quoted, beloved, and, paradoxically, most misinterpreted in the entire Bible. It is often used as a rallying cry for personal motivation, as if it were a sports slogan or an affirmation of self-sufficiency disguised as faith. Yes, I can. I will accomplish all things. But this superficial reading completely distorts the message the Apostle Paul intended to convey. To understand it faithfully, we must return to the context, to the purpose of the letter to the Philippians, and to the heart of the gospel that beats behind these words. The letter to the Philippians was written by Paul from a Roman prison, probably during his incarceration in Rome, around 60 to 62 AD. Far from being a triumphalist text, it is a letter born of suffering, uncertainty, and absolute dependence on God. Paul was not on a podium celebrating victories, he was chained, possibly facing the possibility of death, Philippians 1 verses 20 to 23. Yet, in the midst of that reality, he writes with joy, peace, and supernatural confidence. Philippians is known as the letter of joy, not because everything was easy, but because Paul's joy did not depend on circumstances, but on Christ. In chapter 4, Paul concludes his letter with practical exhortations about unity, joy, prayer, and peace. Just before verse 13, he speaks about his attitude toward poverty and abundance. The Philippians had sent him an offering to help him in his need, and he thanks them deeply. But he clarifies something crucial: his contentment did not depend on receiving help, but on an inner source. It says in Philippians 4 verses 11 to 12, "I do not say this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to be in need, and I know how to be rich. In all things and in all things I have learned both how to be full and how to be hungry, both how to abound and how to suffer need." It is in this context, of contentment in adversity and prosperity, that verse 13 emerges. Paul isn't saying, "I can win any battle, achieve any goal, or accomplish any dream." He's saying, "I can endure any circumstance, hunger, prison, abandonment, danger, because Christ gives me the strength to do it." The Greek word translated all, panta, doesn't refer to anything imaginable, but to all the situations God allows in his life. It's not a blank check for our desires, but a promise of divine sufficiency in the midst of trial. The key is in the phrase, "in Christ who strengthens me." Paul doesn't say, "in myself," or "with my determination," or "through my positive faith." He recognizes that his ability is not autonomous, but derived. Christ is the source, the sustenance, and the power. The word strengthens, which means to infuse power from within, to fill with dynamic force. It's not an external force that pushes, but an internal energy that transforms. It's the same word used in Ephesians 6 verse 10, "Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might." This brings us to an essential truth: the Christian life is not about doing things for Christ, but about allowing Christ to live in and through us. Paul expressed this clearly in Galatians 2 verse 20, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Philippians 4 verse 13 is the practical application of that principle. It's not "I can," but "Christ in me can." It's not self-sufficiency, but theocenteredness, God at the center. One of the great modern traps is turning this verse into a mantra of personal success. We see it on athletes' t-shirts, on social media with pictures of achievements, in self-improvement speeches. But if Paul were here, he would say, no. It's not about running faster, making more money, or achieving fame. It's about keeping faith in the darkness, loving your enemy, forgiving the unforgivable, giving when you don't have, and moving forward when everything falls apart, and doing so with peace and joy. That's what everything means in his context. Furthermore, it's vital to note that Paul wasn't always strong. In 2 Corinthians 1 verses 8 to 9, he confesses that in Asia he suffered such great pressure that we fainted, even despairing of life. What sustained him? That we had the sentence of death in ourselves, so that we might not trust in ourselves but in God who raises the dead. Paul's strength stemmed precisely from his awareness of weakness. As 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." So Philippians 4 verse 13 is not the cry of the strong, but the whisper of the broken who discovers that God is enough. How does this apply today? First, it changes our perspective in the face of adversity. When we face illness, loss, a financial or emotional crisis, we don't just look for a way out, but for the presence of Christ in the midst of the fire. We don't pray just for a miracle, but for the grace to endure if the miracle doesn't come as we expect. Second, it frees us from the pressure of perfectionism. We don't have to achieve it all to be valuable. Our value is in Christ, not in our accomplishments. Third, it invites us to constant dependence. Every day, every challenge, every decision becomes an opportunity to say, "Lord, I can't do it, but you can. Strengthen me." It's also important to understand that this promise is not universal in the sense that anyone can claim it without a relationship with Christ. The verse clearly says, "in Christ." It is not a magic formula, but a spiritual reality for those united to Jesus by faith. Outside of that union, there is no true strength, only human effort that is exhausted. But within Christ, there is an inexhaustible spring of grace, peace, and power. Philippians 4 verse 13 also teaches us about contentment. In a culture obsessed with more success, more followers, more possessions, Paul shows us that true freedom lies in knowing that God provides what is necessary to fulfill His purpose in us. We don't need to control everything. We don't need to have everything. Because in Christ, we have everything we need to be faithful. Finally, this verse points us to the gospel. The reason Christ can strengthen us is because He has already overcome. He faced temptation, rejection, betrayal, the cross, and rose again. His victory is our victory. His strength is our strength. When we say, "I can do all things through Christ," we are affirming that the work of redemption does not depend on us, but on Him. And that is liberating.